So in the last video we discussed about naive realism, and in this video we will be discussing scientific realism. Now scientific realism is a form of realism that was established by the British philosopher John Locke. So here is another 1 mark question that you may expect in the exam. Who is the propounder of scientific realism? And the answer would be John Locke. Now, the origin of scientific realism has come with a negative approach by criticizing the limitations of naive realism. As a kind of realism, scientific realism believes in the existence of an external world independent of the knowing mind. That is because any realism, whatever type it may be, will accept that there is an external world full of objects or things that is out there and which is independent of our knowing mind. But what are the differences between this naive realism and scientific realism? It is that Locke, in his analysis, tries to give a scientific account of the experience of the external world. We have seen that naive realism was more of a commonsensical view. It did not give any detailed account of how we experience the external world. This, in scientific realism, was given by John Locke, and that is why it is different from naive realism. Now, Locke is an empiricist philosopher. I hope all of you remember what is empiricism and what is rationalism. Empiricism is that theory of the origin of knowledge according to which sense experience is the only source of knowledge. So we get our knowledge of everything through sense experience. That is what the empiricist philosophers believe. Now John Locke, as we know, is an empiricist philosopher. Locke, in his book An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, gives a detailed analysis of the nature of knowledge. In this context, Locke analyzes the nature of the external object and its relation to the knower. What does Locke analyze here? He analyzes the nature of the external object, how the external object is constituted, and how it stands in a relation with the knower. Now, Locke tries to explain the relationship between the knower and the known object scientifically, and that is why this realism is known as scientific realism. And that is why Locke's version of the realism is known as scientific realism. Now, according to this theory of Locke, we cannot know an object directly. You notice the differences between naive realism and scientific realism here. In naive realism, we were told that we know an object directly. But John Locke says that we cannot know an object directly. We can have knowledge of an object only by a copy or image or representation of the object. You note this thing very clearly. Locke is saying that we cannot know an object directly. Suppose I see this tree outside my house. Now, according to Locke and according to scientific realism of Locke, I cannot have the direct knowledge of this tree. I can know only a copy or an image or a representation of this tree and not the tree directly. We can know an object by the quality it possesses. This is similar to naive realism. Locke is also saying that we can know an object by the qualities it possesses. But all the qualities of an object are not independent of the mind. Here is where it is different from naive realism. Locke is saying that all the qualities of the object are not independent of the mind. There are some qualities of an object which are mind dependent, and there are qualities which are mind independent. Some qualities are the inherent properties of an object, whereas some are dependent on the mind or the consciousness of the knower. As Locke's theory is based on an analysis of the qualities of the external objects, therefore sometimes it is also known as critical realism. Note all these points very sincerely because these are the questions that are going to come in the exam. What is the other name of scientific realism? You will have to say it is critical realism. And why is it so? Because it is based on the analysis of the qualities of the external object. Now, as has already been mentioned, that Locke believes that an object is known through its qualities, but then he again believes that there are some qualities which are inherent to the object, and then there are some qualities which are mind dependent, which depend on the knowing mind. Now, based on this, he makes the distinction between the two kinds of qualities that every object possesses. First one is primary qualities, and the second one is secondary qualities. Now we'll see what are primary qualities and what are secondary qualities. The qualities which are independent of the knowing mind, or the qualities which are objective properties of an object, are called the primary qualities. For example, extension, weight, divisibility, motion, etc. On the other hand, the qualities which are not dependent of the knowing mind, or the qualities which are the subjective properties of an object, are called the secondary qualities. For example, taste, color, smell, etc. of an object. So now what Locke is saying is this. Suppose there is an object. Now it will be possible for us to analyze that any object, for that matter, will have two sets of qualities. One set is the primary qualities. Now what are those primary qualities? Those are the qualities that belong to the object. They are there in the object and they are not mind dependent. What are those? Those are, suppose, say, the weight of an object or the extension of an object. Any material object, for that matter, will have an extension. What does extension mean? Extension means that it will occupy a space. Suppose there is a book on the table. Now that book has an extension because it is occupying a space upon the table. The table similarly has an extension because it is occupying a place on the floor. So any material object, anything that is made of matter, will have extension. It will occupy a space. Now that quality, the extension of an object, is a primary quality because it is inherent. It is objective property of the object. It is not mind dependent. It is not in my mind that I see something is occupying a space. It is in the very object itself, because of which it is occupying a space. But in case of the secondary qualities like taste, color, smell, etc., those are secondary because those are mind dependent. Suppose I eat an apple and the taste of the apple is sour to me, and to someone else that apple might taste sweet. Now this sweet and sour, those are the qualities of taste of the apple, are secondary qualities because they are mind dependent. They are knower dependent. They depend on me or that other person who is tasting the apple. So this is the distinction between primary qualities and secondary qualities. So a question that is often seen in the exam is point out the differences between primary and secondary qualities, say for 4 marks or even for 6 marks. So these are the points that have been given in your book. Read them carefully and you will be able to answer it. So primary qualities, as we have seen, are what? They are the inherent properties of an object. They are the fundamental qualities of an object in the sense that they are the objective qualities and the necessary properties of an object. On the other hand, secondary qualities are not fundamental to an object since they depend on the knower's mind. What is the second distinction? Primary qualities remain unchanged through all the time. Now, if something is a primary quality of an object, it will remain unchanged through time and space. For example, the shape, the extension, etc. of an object remain unchanged in all locations. But as regards secondary qualities, it may change from person to person and from place to place. For example, the taste or smell of an object may vary from person to person. Third is what? According to Locke, the external objects are the main shelter or abode of the primary qualities. On the other hand, both the external object and the knower's mind are the shelter or abode of the secondary qualities. So Locke is saying that the primary qualities reside in the object itself, but the secondary qualities reside partly in the object and partly in the knower's mind. Now, primary qualities reflect the idea of the mind directly because they are the unchanging properties of something. But secondary qualities may appear differently to different person Locke is of the view that secondary qualities are some of the sensations generated by primary qualities. Now, since primary qualities are objective, therefore they can only determine the original nature of an object. Locke is saying that since primary qualities are objective properties of an object, they are the only ones that can determine the original nature of an object. If I want to say how a particular kind of object is, I have to know its primary qualities. Now, since secondary qualities are mind dependent, they cannot determine the exact nature of an object. Thus, Locke, by distinguishing between primary and secondary qualities, give a scientific interpretation of the nature of the external object. He does also opine that we can know an object only by representation or copy of the object. Therefore, Locke's scientific realism is also known as representationalism. Now, what are some of the basic features or characteristics of scientific realism? They are, pardon me for a minute. So, like other forms of realism, scientific realism also asserts that the object of knowledge is independent of the knower's mind. As we have seen, any realism for that matter will say that the object of knowledge is not dependent on the knowing mind. The second point is that we cannot know an object directly. We can only know it by its qualities. Now, primary qualities are independent of the knower's mind and secondary qualities are mind dependent. What is the third point? It says that we cannot see an object. We can see only the copies or images of the object. Fourth point says, the process of knowledge is totally an independent process. The nature of an object is not affected by this process. Only the copies or images are affected by this process. This is because Locke believes that what we know is only the copies or images of the object and not the object directly. Now, according to scientific realism, knowledge is an indirect process. We have seen that naive realists believe that knowledge is a direct process, and Locke and scientific realism believes that knowledge is an indirect process. It is indirect in the sense that the object of knowledge cannot be comprehended by the knower, because only a copy or image of the object is known by the knower. Now, the original nature of an object can be manifested by the primary qualities only, because they are the unchanging and objective properties of an object. Thus, scientific realism of Locke, we can see an object remains unknown and unknowable, just as we see in Kant's philosophy, Immanuel Kant's philosophy. Our mind or consciousness functions as a screen. The subject matter of our knowledge is mirrored on the screen and reflected in the form of ideas. Therefore, knowledge can be obtained by the representations of the external objects. Thus, the possibility of direct knowledge is ruled out by Locke. Therefore, knowledge is an indirect process. This is the main theme of Locke's scientific realism. He held that knowledge is an indirect process. We can never know an object directly. Although the object exists there in the external world, that is true. That is accepted by Locke, that an object is existing in the external world independent of the knowing mind. But my knowing of the object, this is where he differs from naive realism. He is saying that when we know an object, we know only a copy or image or representation of the object and not the object directly. And what does that mean? That means that knowledge itself becomes an indirect process. Only the copy of the external world is known to us. Now, naturally, there has been some criticism against Locke's theory. We'll look into these criticisms now. What is the first criticism? The first criticism is that, according to Locke, the knowledge of the external object is unknown and unknowable. Thus, we can see that Locke restricts the limits of knowledge and closes the door of certainty of knowledge permanently. Now, John Locke, through this theory, what has he done? He has closed the door of certainty in knowledge. He has said that the true nature of the object always remains unknown and unknowable because primary qualities of an object cannot be known by us. So, given that, what becomes is that the knowledge of the external world gets limited, it gets restricted. It means that we can never know for sure what is the nature of the external objects that we perceive. Now, this is a limitation of Locke's theory. The second limitation or criticism is that, according to Locke, the correspondence of an object to its ideas gives knowledge. If there is no correspondence of the objects to its ideas, then knowledge is proved to be false. But Locke is of the view that we cannot perceive a thing directly. If this is the case, then how can we verify whether there is any correspondence between the object of the knowledge and its ideas? As such, this theory cannot distinguish between truth and falsity of knowledge. Now, Locke, like the naive realist, believes in the correspondence theory of knowledge. It says that if there is a correspondence between the object of knowledge and the ideas that we have of the object of knowledge, then it is a true knowledge. But as Locke himself has said, that the ideas of the object of knowledge that we have is only a copy, is not the real idea. So if that is the case, then how can we say that there is correspondence between the idea and the object, or there is non-correspondence between the idea and the object? So in this way, Locke's theory is faulty. The third criticism is that Locke's division between the primary and secondary qualities is unsatisfactory. George Berkeley, a philosopher following Locke, has remarked, like secondary qualities, the primary qualities are also mind-dependent. For example, the weight of an object varies from individual to individual. Now, John Locke said that the primary qualities are mind-independent. They are the qualities that are objectively present in the object. But George Berkeley pointed out that primary qualities are just like secondary qualities, mind-dependent. How? He takes the example of weight. He says that the weight of an object varies from person to person. So how can we say that the weight, which is a primary quality according to Locke, is not mind-dependent? What is the fourth criticism? It is that Locke's scientific realism divides the world into two parts, objective world and the subjective world. But he fails to engulf the breach between these two worlds by his vain attempt by the images of an object. Now, this divide between the objective world of the primary qualities and the subjective world of the secondary qualities, Locke does not give any proper explanation of how that bridge can be gapped. One can experience the downfall of realism in Locke's philosophy for his inclination to idealism in the form of mind-dependent secondary qualities. And that is why you should note it down that John Locke is called an half-hearted empiricist because he has inclined himself towards idealism by accepting that there are secondary qualities in an object which are mind-dependent. So thus, Locke's scientific realism has come in for some severe criticisms, yet in the epistemological solution of philosophical problems, it occupies an important space. Very specifically, it succeeded in overcoming the mistakes committed by naive realists, in the sense that the naive realists could not explain illusions, hallucinations, etc., but this can be explained with John Locke's scientific realism. Because say the case of an illusion where you mistake a rope for a snake. Now, John Locke could say that what you are mistaking is only an image or copy of the rope and not the rope itself. And so, the rope has appeared to you as a snake. These kind of explanations were lacking in naive realism, but John Locke was able to do it. Now, though it is criticized as a blending of realism and idealism, yet indirectly Locke's inclination to idealism helps to solve many epistemological problems. As Kant has rightly said that in the knowledge process, neither realism nor idealism by itself is sufficient. A blending is required, and through that only we can solve all epistemological or knowledge related problems. I hope that was helpful, and other units will be discussed subsequently through this method. Thank you.